When I was 9 years old, I went to the library with my mother because it was summer vacation and I needed something to do. At this age, I was really interested in sci-fi, fantasy, adventure novels. I really liked Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, those One Love books. Do you guys remember those? As I was looking around, my mom handed me a book and said, "You should get this one, it looks so cute." And I tried to kind of politely decline because, frankly, I thought the book looked boring and too girly, but she insisted. She was like, "No, look, it's so sweet, it's about sisters." And I was like, okay, fine, and I checked it out to kind of get her off my back. I cracked it open one afternoon because I was bored, and ever since that day, The Penderwicks by Jeannie Birdsall has been my favorite book of all time, even as a grown woman. There are 5 books in the series, and when I first started reading them, there were only 3, and I read them cover to cover. I burned a hole in those books. I would read them upside down to just keep things interesting when I got too tired of reading them right side up. I love these books more than probably anything else in the world. Some of you might even remember that my old avatar here on YouTube was taken from drawings I would make of the book covers. I recommended them to every single one of my friends and it worked exactly once, and I followed the series to its conclusion, all 5 books. And as much as I love this series, I have never been more disappointed in the conclusion of anything. I don't get a lot of opportunities to talk about these books because I don't know many people who have read them and because the target audience is like 12 at the oldest, but I'd like to go through these books for you today and share my thoughts. Hopefully this video reaches other people who feel the same way I do. I'm pretty sure there's a small Penderwicks fandom on Tumblr, so hopefully it finds you guys. But if you're not familiar with these books, don't worry. I'm going to take you through the journey of reading this series, and hopefully by the end you'll see what I'm getting at. The Penderwicks, or as my mother always called them, the Penderwinkles, has a very simple premise. At its core, it's just a modern retelling of Little Women. Little Women, of course, is Louisa May Alcott's classic novel about the 4 March sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy. As I'm sure you know, the book takes place in Massachusetts and follows the sisters into adulthood. Meg is the oldest and is the ideal woman of the time. She's gentle, kind, and the prettiest of the sisters. Jo, the protagonist, is stubborn, temperamental, and dreams of being a writer. Beth is shy, quiet, and a talented piano player. She also dies. Amy is the youngest and can often be vain, self-centered, and materialistic, and she's an artist. Then there's Laurie, the rich boy next door who hangs out with the sisters. The girls are raised by their mother, as their father is away serving the Union Army in the Civil War. Because the Penderwicks takes place vaguely in the modern day, a lot of the more antiquated storylines of Little Women were not carried over. The biggest similarities between the two are the characters and their relationships. The Penderwicks is also about 4 sisters, but the personality traits of each sister have kind of been scrambled and reassigned to these new characters. Rosalind, the oldest, is our Meg. She's responsible, level-headed, and the prettiest. I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Rosalind, but I've been reading it as Rosalind for over a decade and they call her Rosie, so I'm going to pronounce it Rosalind and you're going to have to be okay with that. Sky is our Jo. She's brash and short-tempered, but rather than literature, her greatest love is astrophysics. Jane is our Amy, and she's the writer. She's wildly imaginative and dramatic, but less self-centered than Amy. Batty, the youngest, is our Beth. She's shy and timid, and she loves animals, which is a defining trait of hers. Note that while Batty has Beth's personality, she is the youngest sister, just like Amy. The Penderwick sisters live in the fictional town of Cameron, Massachusetts, and are raised by their father Martin, a botany professor. Their mother Elizabeth died of cancer shortly after Batty was born. They also have a dog named Hound. Hound is the best dog you could ever ask for, and he loves Batty more than anything. He follows her everywhere, sleeps in her bed, and is always ready to protect her from danger. By the way, in case it wasn't obvious, Batty is just a nickname. Her actual name is Elizabeth. She was named after her mother. So now that you're acquainted with our characters, let's get into the actual books. I don't want to just recap, so I'll only go over the bits that are either important to the plot or will come back later in the series. The way this book opens is such a perfect start. For a long time after that summer, the four Penderwick sisters still talked of Arundel. "Fate drove us there," Jane would say. "No, it was the greedy landlord who sold our vacation house on Cape Cod," someone else would say, probably Skye. Rosalind is 12, Skye is 11, Jane is 10, and Batty is 4. It's summer vacation and the family is staying at Arundel, a sprawling property in the Berkshire Mountains. The grounds consist of a cottage where the Penderwicks stay, a huge castle-like mansion, and miles of gardens and fields. The property is owned by Brenda Tifton, and the Penderwicks are warned that she's snooty as all get out and doesn't like people messing with her gardens. Upon arriving at the cottage, they meet Cagney, a 19-year-old boy who works as a gardener on the property. Rosalind peered around the car and sneaked a look at the boy's hands. Her best friend, Anna, always said that you could tell a lot about people from their hands. The boy was wearing gardening gloves. I have no idea why that stuck with me so much, but every time I meet a new person, I look at their hands. Before they get to their cottage, Jane notices a boy in one of the mansion windows. Skye tells her she's just imagining things, but Jane decides to use this boy as inspiration for her new book. At this point in time, she's written several books about Sabrina Starr, who I imagined is looking like Maximum Ride from the manga specifically. Sabrina Starr likes to rescue things, mostly animals. I'm going to be reading you a lot of passages in this video, not necessarily because they're relevant to the plot, but because I really like them. Arundel Cottage was not only yellow, it was the creamiest, butteriest yellow the Penderwicks had ever seen. It was all a cottage is supposed to be, small and snug, with a front porch, pink climbing roses, and lots of trees for shade. Skye heads out to explore the grounds and finds a tunnel through one of the hedges. While trying to avoid Mrs. Tifton, she crashes into a boy her age and knocks him out. It's the boy in the window, the very interesting boy in the title, and the Lori of this story. Skye put her hand over the boy's mouth and whispered, "Shh, trouble. That's snooty Mrs. Tifton, and she's a real pain. If she caught us in her garden, she'd—" The boy jerked away from her hand and struggled to sit up. He was even more pale than before, so pale she could count every freckle on his face. "Are you all right? You look like you're going to be sick," she said. "Jeffrey, where are you?" came Mrs. Tifton's voice again. Then Skye finally understood. "Oh no." "Excuse me," said the boy with great dignity. "My mother's calling me and you're in my way." This next chapter is important because it's where we get MOPS and MOOPS. These are acronyms for meetings the sisters hold, meeting of Penderwick sisters, and meeting of older Penderwick sisters. There's a special oath they do, it's a whole ritual. Rosalind made her right hand into a fist and held it out toward her sisters. Skye put her fist on top of Rosalind's, and Jane put hers on top of Skye's. In unison they chanted, "This I swear by the Penderwick family honor," then broke their fists apart. During the moops, Skye tells Jane and Rosalind what happened that afternoon with Mrs. Tifton's son, whose name is Jeffrey. They decide that Skye will make him cookies as an apology. However, Skye doesn't know a broiler from a boiler from a rolling pin, and she burns them. Rosalind yells at her, Skye loses her temper, and Jeffrey overhears her calling him rich and stuck up. So they're back to square one. But after apologizing for the initial incident on Skye's behalf, Jane and Jeffrey have become fast friends, and now Skye feels left out. So here was Skye, slogging along behind Jeffrey and Jane, listening to them gab on and on like old friends. It was enough to make a person sick. Of course, Skye wasn't jealous, and she didn't wish anyone would pay attention to her or anything. It was just such a waste of time being with people who talked about such boring stuff. After Batty wanders into a field occupied by a bull, Skye, Jane, and Jeffrey have to work as a team to save her life. The ordeal brings them all together, and Skye and Jeffrey become friends. They also decide that Jeffrey is now an honorary Penderwick. I was a jerk before and I apologize, and this is my real apology because Rosalind and Jane wrote the first one. Skye stuck out her hand. Jeffrey looked up from the ground and stuck out his hand too. They shook. Jane said, "Their hearts laid bare by the near loss of a loved one, the two enemies declared a truce." "I want to shake his hand too," said Batty. Jeffrey shook her hand, then Jane's hand for good measure. You may be asking, where is Mr. Penderwick during all of this? I don't know. He spends most of the book collecting plants. Your follow-up question might be, okay, well, where's Rosalind? She's with Cagney. He has two rabbits, Yaz and Carla, that he introduces Rosalind and Batty to. So by now we've met everyone listed in the title of the book. Rosalind and Batty start visiting the rabbits almost daily. In fact, Rosalind starts spending all her time with Cagney, baking him brownies, reading about the Civil War, which he's very fascinated by, and helping him garden. Jeffrey takes Skye and Jane inside Arundel Hall, the mansion where he and his mother live, and the girls discover that he's an excellent piano player and dreams of being a musician. The Tiftons' housekeeper, Churchy, invites them all to Jeffrey's 11th birthday party. She takes them to the attic, which is full of Mrs. Tifton's old dresses, so they can each pick one to wear to the party. Up in the attic, Churchy tells Rosalind Mrs. Tifton's entire backstory. She was brought up in a very rich, influential family and got married when she was very young as a way of rebelling against her father, General Framley. She got pregnant with Jeffrey, and she and Jeffrey's father got divorced shortly after. She didn't want to go back to her maiden name, but her father didn't want her to keep her married name either, so they compromised on Tifton, her mother's maiden name. When I read these books as a child, I imagined Mrs. Tifton as an older woman, but if she had Jeffrey before she was 20 and he's turning 11 now, she has gotta be 30 at the oldest. Jeffrey's father left before he was born, and Jeffrey has never met him and has no idea who he is. That evening, Rosalind called a mops to tell her sisters the sad story of Jeffrey's missing father. Then the sisters went off to their separate rooms, and as each fell asleep, she thought that if there could be anything worse than having a parent die, it would be having a parent who never bothered to meet you. It's now the day of the birthday party, and the girls are all dressed up, and Rosalind hoped that she herself looked all right. She had put on lipstick too, but then rubbed it off before coming downstairs. Anna believed that lipstick looked silly until at least 8th grade. That's another line that always stuck with me, and I didn't wear lipstick until high school. I can't believe I was taking advice from a fictional character's best friend. The birthday party turns out to be dinner at Arundel Hall with Mrs. Tifton and her boyfriend, Dexter Dupre, who I always imagined as like if all of my uncles were combined into one person. Dexter is smarmy and self-important, and Jeffrey can't stand him. At dinner, the girls find out that Mrs. Tifton plans to ship Jeffrey off to Pensy Military Academy so he can become a general, just like her father. The girls try to console Jeffrey with birthday gifts, and Batty gives Jeffrey a framed photograph of Hound. Things take a turn for the worse once again when the kids overhear Mrs. Tifton and Dexter call the Penderwicks vulgar and discuss their plans to get married and enroll Jeffrey at Pensy at the end of the summer. So now there's a ticking clock on everything. The Penderwicks get into one mishap after another. Batty accidentally lets the rabbits out of their cages and they run away, so the kids have to track them down before Cagney finds out. Batty, believing she killed the rabbits, decides to run away, so now she's missing. They manage to find her, and Jeffrey saves her from getting hit by a car, so he has now saved her life twice. In some cultures, it's believed that when a person saves someone from death, he or she forever owns a part of that someone's soul. So Jeffrey is now linked to our family, whether he likes it or not. That's kind of romantic, said Jane. Romantic schmomantic. What the heck would Jeffrey do with Batty's soul, said Skye. Batty opened her eyes sleepily. He could marry me, she said. Marry you! Mrs. Tifton has entered a garden club competition, which Skye, Jeffrey, and Jane completely ruin after getting carried away with a game of soccer. And to be honest, I'm completely on Mrs. Tifton's side here. I would be so mad. And Mrs. Tifton is mad. She's convinced the Penderwicks are a bad influence on Jeffrey and wants to get him to Pensy, as soon as possible. Everything boils over when Mrs. Tifton bans the girls from her home and finds out Jeffrey overheard her conversation with Dexter about their marriage. It's all of them. They're uncouth, rude, and conceited. This is what happens when parents don't do their jobs. The father's a pushover, and who knows where the mother ran off to. I suppose she got tired of caring for all those girls. I certainly would. And that Rosalind is always chasing after Cagney like a lovesick puppy. If she keeps up that kind of behavior, one of these days some man will allow himself to be caught, and that will be the end of her wide-eyed innocence. Plus, you can't tell me there's nothing wrong with the little one. Skye is horrified to hear Mrs. Tifton insult her family, especially her mother, and she loses her temper. This is where we get one of my favorite moments between Skye and Batty, who is also here and very upset by the situation. They don't have the closest relationship, we'll get more into that later, so it's nice to see them bond. Am I odd? Is there something wrong with me, like Mrs. Tifton said? No, you stupid idiot, there's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect. Mrs. Tifton doesn't know what she's talking about. Are you sure? Absolutely positive. Skye tells Rosalind about what happened, including the things Mrs. Tifton said about her and Cagney. I have to say, that is a crazy thing to say to your 11-year-old son about a 12-year-old girl. She's ashamed and embarrassed that her crush was so obvious. Was she in love? She had asked herself that many times in the last few weeks. Anna's mother said you're in love when you feel like you've been hit by a truck. Rosalind felt bad enough for a motorcycle maybe, but not a truck. She goes for a walk that night to clear her head, and who does she find by the lily pond but Cagney, and a mystery girl who we later find is named Kathleen. I'll be okay, thought Rosalind, if only he doesn't kiss her. He kissed her. Now Rosalind felt like she'd been hit by a truck. Poor Rosalind tries to sneak off without being noticed, but slips and falls into the pond, hitting her head. Do you know who she is? Said the girl. Rosalind, the oldest of those Penderwick sisters I told you about. Oh man, she's starting to shiver. She's kind of pretty, don't you think? I don't know, she's just a kid. As bad as I feel for Rosalind, that is the correct answer to that question. With the threat of Pensy looming, Jeffrey has decided to run away to Boston. He and the Penderwick sisters decide that he will sleep in Batty's room and leave for Boston the following morning, but before Jeffrey can take off, Mrs. Tifton and Dexter show up at the cottage. Jeffrey and Mrs. Tifton talk things out, and they leave the cottage together. They don't hear a word from Jeffrey until the next morning, when they're all packed up and ready to go. Cagney turns up to say goodbye and gifts Rosalind a rose bush. And please say goodbye to Kathleen, and thank her for me. Who? What did he mean, who? You know, the girl who helped pull me out of the pond. Oh, Kathleen. That didn't work out. She wasn't easy to talk to, not like you. Hold on to that skill, Rosie, for when you're old enough to care about boys. They'll appreciate it. Cagney, it's getting harder to defend you. Jeffrey shows up at the very last minute and explains that he no longer has to go to Pensy, and Mrs. Tifton has allowed him to attend a different boarding school in Boston, where he even gets to take a music class. She and Dexter are still getting married, but all in all, this is a major victory. They all promise to visit each other, and they say their goodbyes. This whole time, Batty has been wearing a pair of mesh butterfly wings. I put them in my drawing but didn't actually mention them yet. She loves them dearly and doesn't go anywhere without them, but just before they leave, she gives the wings to Jeffrey. So that was The Penderwicks. What a lovely book. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. As an adult, I have such a different perspective than I did all those years ago. When I was a kid, it sounded like a dream to be able to run around through these endless gardens and explore tunnels and hedges and fancy mansions. It still sounds pretty awesome. But the older I get, the more I understand Mrs. Tifton, especially now that I realize how young she was. She doesn't always make the right choices, and she probably has a lot of bad ideas about certain groups of people, but she's trying her best to create a good life for her son, and if I were her, I'd probably hate the Penderwicks too. Honestly, I'm really looking sideways at Martin. His 4-year-old daughter almost died twice. He never finds out about the bull, by the way. I'm not going to judge anyone's parenting, not even a fictional character, because I have no idea what it's like. But if my 12-year-old daughter was going to a 19-year-old's house every day, I would maybe keep tabs on that. But I could never hate this book. I love the laid-back, slice-of-life story. I love Jeannie Birdsall's style of writing. I love these characters like family. I hope you can understand why I, as a child, fell so deeply in love with this book. I am forever grateful to my sweet mother, because otherwise I would have never known it existed. 10 out of 10. Before we move on to book 2, I would like to present to you my favorite review of anything ever. I found this years ago on Amazon and it has not left my mind since. This is a 1-star review of the first book, and I am going to read it to you in its entirety because it is incredible. These young girls could open a lemonade stand of feminism. In the imaginary world of the Penderwick sisters, this will, of course, have no negative consequences. For instance, none of them will be 30-something career women with dusty ovaries, desperately seeking a provider male whom they secretly despise as much as their father, while supervising an ever-growing herd of cats. This book reminded me of a scene in C.S. Lewis's Paralandra, where Satan tempts Eve by telling her story after story of women who, by rebelling, saved families, friends, and the world. This is one of those pretty lies. In typical Disney insta-drama, both families in this tale are broken. Here, the girls are raised by an absent-minded professor. Having lost his wife 4 years earlier, he hasn't bothered to find a suitable replacement. Instead, he has pushed all motherly duties onto his girls. Having known girls who came from this exact situation, it is neither fun nor pretty. They are seriously messed up for life. The father similarly can't be bothered to properly supervise his children, just like he can't be bothered to train their dog. One small lie among so many, but a telling one is this. In reality, an untrained large dog is not a fun, cool pet, but is a creature of wrath and woe. Anyway, this sort of attack on males is typical. In this book, the males are insipid, sneering, overbearing, or neutered. As for the Penderwick girls, they're a complete wreck. They speak to each other quite rudely. The 4-year-old does not obey. She wanders into a bullpen, endangering herself and others. Of course, that's what happens when you leave a 10 and 11-year-old supervising a toddler. Later, she wanders off again, causing serious problems. Yet in neither case is there punishment, either for the 4-year-old or those entrusted with her supervision. In fact, at no point in the book, despite numerous acts of misbehavior, is punishment ever undertaken by the limp-wristed father. Instead, gross malfeasance is ignored or justified. The model of responsibility, the 12-year-old Rosalind, gets a crush on an 18-year-old gardener and tries to spend as much time with him as possible. Of course, that's why parents don't let 12-year-olds do whatever they want, because they do not have realistic concepts of risk and danger. Yet, here Rosalind begins visiting his apartment daily. That's some good fathering. In the real world, that ends with your daughter pregnant and the boy a registered sex offender for the rest of his life. The gardener is portrayed as a good guy who sits around conversing with the preteen. No normal 18-year-old boy acts this way. The book winks at the fruitlessness of such a romance, but at the end, the gardener has broken up with his hot girlfriend because she's not as conversational as Rosalind. Yeah, right. As for the other girls, Jane plays soccer and writes books about a heroine who rescues a boy. How non-traditional. Skye wants to be a mathematician or astrophysicist, neither area dominated by women. When the girls later decide we need to start acting like perfect little ladies, Skye disagrees, saying she'll be a perfect gentleman. Blech. As for the others' career aspirations, Rosalind is to be an international diplomat. Betty, the 4-year-old, a Renaissance woman, as opposed to a Renaissance man. Conspicuously absent is a career as wife and mother. They scoff at the idea of something girly like fashion model. To be fair, this review is drawing directly from the book at several points. We're halfway through, by the way. Meanwhile, the only decent character in the book is portrayed as a real bitch. Mrs. Tifton cares about family and community. She wants her garden to win a prize. She wants her son, in following family tradition, to learn to golf and to go to a military academy. He doesn't want to. He wants to be a musician. You see, this is why responsible adults don't let 11-year-olds run their lives, because adults have knowledge about the real world and foresight about what will prepare their children to cope with harsh reality. She is understandably concerned that the girls are having a bad influence on her child. At one point, she diagnoses this situation perfectly, saying they're uncouth, rude, and conceited. This is what happens when parents don't do their jobs. The father's a pushover, and that Rosalind is always chasing after Cagney like a lovesick puppy. I already read that part. All of this truth is dismissed as having come from Mrs. Tifton. I suppose this was the author's way of defraying this sort of criticism. Those who dissent are old fuddies like Mrs. Tifton. So Mrs. Tifton wants her son to go to military school rather than piano academy. The girls, having grown up in a house without rules and restrictions, think this positively awful and set out to liberate the poor boy. They succeed. He gets to go off to music school and, given his upbringing, will soon be well on his way to being a homosexual. The only thing I can't understand in this book is why Mrs. Tifton rented the guest cottage in the first place. Big mistake. This is the best part, okay? Are you ready? A 30-year reunion looks like this. Rosalind is barely scraping by as a 42-year-old single mother with a baby or two from different men who pumped and dumped her. Having played soccer into college, Jane is now a women's gym coach. Skye is a trial attorney riding herd to a slew of cats and married to a man who changed his last name to Penderwick during their alt-mating ritual. Betty drowned in a swimming pool a few months after the story ended. Mr. Penderwick got put in an old folks' home. If you want your daughters to end up like these girls, by all means let them read this book. If you don't, then you will either want to 1. Skip this book, or 2. Use it as a teaching moment to discuss what happens when girls behave like disgusting, godless heathens. 82 people found this helpful. The Penderwicks on Gardam Street takes place just a few months after the first, during the fall of the same year. What year, you ask? We don't know. The first installment was published in 2005, so we can assume that Feel Good Inc. was topping the charts as the Penderwicks were romping around Arundel. Gardam Street was published in 2008, but no dates are ever given at any point in the series. It's just set vaguely in the modern day. I've always appreciated this choice. It makes these books feel so timeless. Book 1 was split pretty evenly between the four sisters' perspectives, but this one is a very Rosalind-heavy book. As I've gotten older, I have completely turned around on her. I wouldn't say she was my least favorite sister, but I did used to think she was kind of boring and only cared about boys. I liked Jane and especially Skye much better. Now, she's my favorite character in the entire series. Something I neglected to mention when I was talking about book 1 is the way that Rosalind has been parentified and is Batty's primary caregiver. She picks Batty up from daycare, she tells her stories every night, she even had a breakdown after Batty ran away in the first book because she promised their mother she would take care of her. As the oldest, Rosalind is the dependable one who looks out for everyone else, but is that really who she is or who she had to become after her mother died? Elizabeth's death and the way her family grieves is a recurring theme throughout this series, and Gardam Street specifically. This book is the only one in the series to open with a prologue about the girls visiting their mother in the hospital shortly before she dies. Despite the best efforts from the best doctors, within a week, hope ran out altogether. Elizabeth Penderwick had enough time to say goodbye to her husband and girls one unbearable evening, but only just enough. She died before dawn the next morning, with baby Batty nestled calm and quiet in her arms. We go back to the present, where the girls have returned from summer vacation to their home on Gardam Street. Rosalind is baking a pineapple upside-down cake because beloved Aunt Claire, Martin's sister, is coming to visit. I wanted to make a pineapple upside-down cake of my own, but instead of eggs, I used applesauce, and instead of butter, I used coconut oil, and instead of pineapple rings, I used pineapple chunks, so I mixed everything together, and I put it in the oven, and then I forgot all about it. Eat your heart out, Rosalind. I tried turning it back over to see if the cake itself was any good. So we're gonna do a little taste test. Oh, Things go south when Claire presents Martin with a letter Elizabeth wrote shortly before she died, where she gave him her blessing to move on and find love again. Your mother believed you girls would be old enough by now that Martin could expand his world a bit, and frankly, I don't think she was wrong, said Aunt Claire. So he and I have agreed upon a plan. Your father will jump into the dating pool, shall we say, and stay there for the next several months. During that time, he'll take out at least 4 different women. None of the Penderwicks are pleased about this plan, but Rosalind takes it particularly hard. As it usually does, life goes on. Skye and Jane are on a soccer team together, and as captain, Skye is committed to learning to control her temper. However, the captain of the opposing team is her classmate, Melissa Pattinaud, and they hate each other. When I was a kid, I had a neighbor named Melissa, so now I always imagine her whenever I read these books. We're also introduced to a couple of the colorful characters that live on Gardam Street with the Penderwicks. Recently, the Aronson family moved in next door. Iantha Aronson is a professor of astrophysics at Cameron University, where Mr. Penderwick teaches botany. She has a little baby son named Ben who loves ducks. That's why I drew one on his shirt. It's just the 2 of them, as Iantha's husband was killed by a drunk driver before Ben was born. Then there's Tommy Geiger, who was mentioned a couple times in the first installment but never actually seen. He loves football, he's learning Russian, and he often turns up at the Penderwick house to see Rosalind. He lives with his older brother Nick, who also loves sports and tries to enforce this love onto the Penderwicks. I always imagined him as looking like Marco from the Cooking Mama games. Side note, we find out that because of Nick, Rosalind is absolutely cracked at basketball, which is such a fun trait for her to have. Mr. Penderwick starts going on dates, which he hates as much as his daughters do, so the Penderwick sisters, but mostly Rosalind, hold a mops to come up with a plan. None of us like the dating idea, but Daddy agreed to it, and he's honor bound to keep going. Besides, men have needs, added Jane. I read that in a magazine. What needs? Asked Batty. What magazine? Asked Skye. Rosalind's best friend Anna, who you may remember was also mentioned in the first one, has had so many horrible stepmothers that she doesn't even bother to remember their names. Inspired by her misfortune, the girls decide to set their father up with the most horrid women they can find in the hopes of discouraging their father from ever dating again. Technically, it was Sky's idea, but she didn't really mean it and she doesn't want to do it. Let's take a vote. Batty, what say you? I say Daddy should date the lady next door, and then I could play with her baby. But we're supposed to be voting on Sky's Save Daddy plan, which would rule out Iantha anyway because she's not awful. Now, Batty, how do you vote, yes or no? I vote yes. And I vote yes, said Rosalind. That's 2 for Sky's plan. And I make 3 votes, said Jane. Sorry, Sky. So speak I, Rosalind, she said. It's a majority. The Save Daddy plan is official and in place. So they start sending their father on dates, which makes everyone miserable. If guilt had a color, say purple, the Penderwick sisters would have turned so purple that it dripped off them and spread its way through the house, turning everything purple, upstairs and down. We must have the courage to follow the Save Daddy plan, insisted Rosalind. It's for his own good, it really is. Rosalind's troubles are far from over, though. She and Tommy are the same age and have been friends for as long as they can remember, but lately he's been acting strangely. One night, he tells her that Trilby Ramirez has asked him to a school dance. Rosie, do you know Trilby Ramirez? I know who she is. She asked me to go to that autumn extravaganza thing with her tomorrow night. Are you sure? That was rude, so she tried again. I mean, why? I don't know. Tommy sounded almost as surprised as she was. I guess she likes me. Rosalind stopped herself from asking why again. She feels annoyed and upset about it, but she doesn't really know why. She's not the only one, though. Nick intervenes and forces Rosalind to talk some sense into Tommy. It's none of my business, Nick. But he needs help, Rosie. This Trilby's telling everyone he's her boyfriend. She calls him every night, sometimes 2 or 3 times. And here's the worst, she goes to all of his football practices and cheers for him. Talk to him. I've tried, but he doesn't listen to me. He doesn't listen to me either, Nick. Besides, if I could stop people from going on dates just by talking to them, I'd start with Daddy. Poor Mr. Penn. Anna and the Geigers call Mr. Penderwick Mr. Penn, and I think that's cute. Throughout the book, each Penderwick sister gradually grows closer to Iantha. Jane confides in her about the Save Daddy plan, she and Sky bond over astrophysics, and she also gives Rosalind advice on talking to Tommy, which goes terribly. This passage is from later in the book, but I'm just going to drop it in here without context. Rosalind peered into the car, and there was Tommy next to Nick, staring straight ahead. I like walking, she said. Come on, it's pouring. As long as you don't mind a detour, we gotta pick up Trilby. Only then did Tommy turn his head, but his eyes slid past her as though the most fascinating thing in the world was just over her right shoulder. Oh, how dare he ignore her, just as if they hadn't known each other since they were in diapers. Rosalind angrily shook her umbrella, spraying rain all over Nick. Why exactly is the magnificent Trilby blessing the 6th grade performance night with her magnificent presence? Nice attitude, Rosie, said Nick, his grin getting bigger. You're not the only one with a sister in the 6th grade. Tonight you'll be treated to the smooth sounds of Elena Ramirez's saxophone solo. Oh, she wished she were dead. By the way, in case you were wondering whatever happened to Jeffrey, he doesn't actually make an appearance in this one, but Sky gets the chance to visit him at his new school in Boston, and they have the most wonderful time. I just wanted to let y'all know because we haven't seen Jeffrey, or even Sky and Jane really. There's actually an entire subplot where they swap homework assignments and it's a complete disaster. Basically, Jane writes a play for Sky, and because Jane's a writer, the play is very good. They end up putting on a performance of the play at school, and Sky has to star in the play while still passing it off as her own. I'm just not covering it because it's not that consequential, and I don't want you to get bored of me endlessly recapping these books for children. The girls come clean about the Save Daddy plan, and Martin is pretty chill about the whole thing. The next morning, the Penderwicks and the Aronsons all go to Sky and Jane's soccer game, which they win. Sky even patches things up with Melissa. They were talking? And if Rosalind wasn't mistaken, now Melissa was crying. And now, this was beyond imagining, Sky was putting an arm around Melissa. It was perhaps the briefest and most reluctant hug ever known to mankind, but it was a hug nonetheless. Melissa said that she didn't hate me at all, but that she's always been jerky to me because she's always been jealous of me because I'm so smart and a good soccer player. And as the family celebrates, Rosalind takes notice of her father and Iantha. See Aunt Claire lean into Daddy, and see Iantha lean into him too, and see him reach out to steady Iantha. See how gently he does it, and how he looks down at her while he reaches out. They're in love! Well, that worked out nicely. Rosalind springs into action and gathers her sisters for another MOPS, where they come up with a new Save Daddy plan to set him up with Iantha. Martin and Iantha will be speaking at a university gala, and the girls plan to take the battery out of their father's car so he has no choice but to ride along with Iantha. And it works! "Hello, Martin," said Iantha. "What's the trouble?" He turned toward her. As Jane said later, Daddy had stopped noticing anything but Iantha in her dress, and Iantha, seeing him notice her so completely, had gone so still and quiet that she might have been a statue. Love is in the air on Gardam Street because after Martin and Iantha leave together, Tommy shows up. Trilby and I broke up today. That is, I broke up with her because... never mind why. Why? I said never mind why. Fine, I don't care anyway. Because she was boring. Unfortunately, I couldn't tell her that, so she may have gotten the idea that I broke up with her because of you. "Maybe you and I can date when we're older," said Tommy, trying to look nonchalant and failing horribly. "Like when we're 14. 14 now seemed like a long time to wait. 13, I think. January for me and April for you." He leaned down and bravely kissed her on the cheek. "Don't forget, you're waiting for me until we're both 13. She just as bravely kissed him back. "I won't forget." Now that everyone is coupled up, Rosalind and her father have a heart-to-heart. And do you know, well, I know, anyway, that I've relied on you too much since your mother died? I've been remembering how concerned she was about you trying to fill in for her, and how I promised I wouldn't let you become too grown up and responsible. I'm afraid I didn't keep that promise well enough. The book ends with an epilogue where we see Martin and Iantha getting married. Yay! I love this book! Gardam Street is the only installment in the series where Rosalind is the primary character. From here on out, she becomes less and less central, which I think is so unfortunate. Her role within the family and the inner turmoil surrounding it, which she may not even realize, is endlessly fascinating to me. Spoiler alert, but I wish later installments had shown more of the immediate aftermath of Mr. Penn's second marriage and how the older sisters adjusted, especially Rosalind, who had to become a maternal figure for her sisters at the age of 8. The Penderwicks on Gardam Street is probably my favorite of the series. It's the one I go back to most often. The setting is so cozy, the conflict is great, and it's a perfect sequel. 10 out of 10. I've always thought of the first 3 books as kind of a trilogy because the last 2 are different. Let's just say for now that they're different. The Penderwicks at Point Mouette takes place the summer after book 1, so the first 3 books all occur within the span of a year. Rosalind is now 13, Skye 12, Jane 11, and Betty is 5. The premise of this book is another summer vacation. Newlyweds Martin and Iantha are off to England. Ben is going with them. Rosalind is going to New Jersey with Anna, and she is absent for almost the entire book. We barely hear from her at all. Good for her, honestly, she needs a break. That leaves Skye, Jane, and Batty, who are going with Aunt Claire to Point Mouette, a beach on the coast of Maine. They take Hound with them, of course. I can't draw dogs, okay? With Rosalind gone, Skye is now the OAP, or oldest available Penderwick, which is concerning for everyone. Skye is by far the most impulsive sister. She's quick to anger and is not used to this kind of responsibility. She has no idea how to take care of Batty either. They historically haven't really gotten along, and Skye has very little patience for Batty when she cries or gets upset. Skye is not a sensitive creature. She's daunted by the prospect of being the OAP, but is determined to do a good job, especially for Batty. So they drive up to Birch's, the house they'll be staying in, and it sounds idyllic. The girls had been prepared for its lack of size, but not for how charming it was. Like a dollhouse with gray clapboards, red shutters, and window boxes full of bright pansies. But Batty was busy rolling down the window to give Hound a breath of fresh air, and all at once the car was filled with the wild scent of salt, seaweed, marsh grass, and a breeze that had been around the world 1,000 times, and the sisters were gripped by ocean fever. They meet a man named Alec who lives next door to Birch's, and the girls are disappointed to find that he has no children because he looks old enough to have a kid their age. As Skye struggles to look after her sisters, Jane is working on the next Sabrina Starr novel, which she's decided will be a romantic one. She's trying to learn more about love because she's only 11 and doesn't have much experience. Out of the blue, Jeffrey arrives at Birch's. He had been invited originally, but his mother wouldn't let him go. Thankfully, she changed her mind and Jeffrey is reunited with his honorary sisters. Batty wakes up in the middle of the night feeling homesick and missing Ben and Rosalind, and Jeffrey comforts her by teaching her how to play the harmonica. This is actually kind of a huge deal. Until now, none of the Penderwicks have ever been good at music. They can't sing or play any instruments. That's the way it's always been. But Batty's showing some real promise, and Jeffrey, who loves music and plays several instruments, decides to become her teacher. As a reminder, Jeffrey is 11 and Batty is only 5. She looks up to him as a big brother and she wants to be a musician just like him when she grows up. Sky, Jeffrey, and Jane are having the time of their lives. They play soccer just like they did at Arundel. They get groceries at Moose Market, which sounds so fun. I think what I love so much about these first 3 books is how well they capture that sense of childhood magic and wonder and optimism, and just how fun it was to run around outside with your friends all day. All the while, Jane is thinking about love. Jane knew there was no point in discussing love with Sky, who didn't have what Jane considered to be a romantic soul, or with Jeffrey, whose head was so stuffed with music that there wasn't room for much else. Iantha would have answered her questions. She always did. It was one of the million nice things about her. Rosalind might have too, though she had said it was none of Jane's business that one time Jane asked what it was like to kiss Tommy. Maybe that hadn't been a good question to start with. She ends up getting a huge crush on a local boy, this punk kid named Dominic. I always pictured him as the kid from Despicable Me 2, so she's busy with that for a pretty good chunk of the book. As it turns out, Alec is also a musician, and he becomes a sort of mentor for Jeffrey. Both Sky and Jane notice that Alec looks familiar, but they can't put their finger on why. Sky gradually gets better at being in charge, and she's thrilled to have Jeffrey here at Point Mouette. Jeffrey's close with all the sisters, of course, but he and Sky are best friends. They run around having adventures together, and Jeffrey tells her about everything he's learning from Alec because even if she doesn't understand, he knows she'll listen. This book does focus pretty heavily on Sky's friendship with Jeffrey because starting with this book, we notice kind of a shift in their dynamic. Alec's marriage was so bad he won't even talk about it, just that he was young and it lasted only a few months. That's sad, don't you think? Jeffrey shook his head at the sadness. I hope I never get divorced. You can't even get married for years and years. Why worry about getting divorced? Besides, I'm sure there are plenty of musicians who manage to stay married. I guess so, he said. Then, do you ever wonder if we'll get married? To each other? Good grief. It's just that sometimes I wish we lived closer to each other, Sky. I sometimes sort of miss you. Sometimes. I do too. She cleared her throat. Sometimes. This is why Sky was my favorite as a kid. I was so inspired by this fire and drive that she has, and even though she can be very brash and kind of sarcastic and doesn't deal very well with matters of the heart, she does have a sensitive side and she does care very deeply about her loved ones, and I think this book is the best example of that. Dominic kisses Jane, but when she finds out he was dared to kiss as many girls as he could, she's heartbroken and cuts off all her hair. I chopped off my hair, said Jane. My one beauty.
Well, I only sold what was my own. Joe, your hair! Your one beauty.
Boy.
Alec kindly takes her to get a proper haircut, and Sky and Batty decide to get one too in solidarity. They had all been growing their hair out at the beginning of the book. That's why I drew Rosalind with longer hair. Jane manages to recover and later tells Sky that she's happy to stay single at the ripe old age of 11. A writer has to be able to concentrate on her work without distractions. What about you? Do you think you'll get married? Sky frowned. Why is everybody talking about marriage? First Jeffrey, now you. Who is Jeffrey talking about marrying? You, right? Do you want to marry him? I don't know, I'm only 12. Hey, and that reminds me, I figured out last night who Alec looks like. Who? Jeffrey. You think Alec looks like Jeffrey? That's ridiculous. Not if you imagine what Jeffrey will look like in 10 or 15 years. You should do that anyway, as insurance, in case you marry him. I'm not going to marry... Never mind. To test Jane's theory, Sky and Alec look through old family photos of his, and Sky ends up telling him what happened with Jeffrey's parents. It's even sadder because she's so awful, and her new husband, Dexter, is just as awful, or worse. Last summer, they almost sent Jeffrey to a horrible military school to get him ready to follow in the footsteps of his grandfather, you know, the tyrant, old General Framley. 3 happened then. The first was the box of photographs falling from Alec's lap to the floor, loosing a flood of snapshots. The second was Alec turning so pale that Sky could count every freckle on his face. Jeffrey's mother is Brenda Framley. Am I right? Brenda Framley of Arundel." "I think so," she whispered, bewildered and frightened. "I mean, yes." He stood up now and crossed over to the window, and with his back to Sky he said, "Jeffrey is 11 now. He told me that. When will he turn 12? "Next month, August 8th. "August. Yes, that works." Alec reeled, and for a moment Sky was afraid he'd crash over. Alec is, indeed, Jeffrey's long-lost father. What are the odds of that? He goes to Arundel to confront his ex-wife, and poor Sky has to keep it a secret from Jeffrey until Alec gets back to tell him himself. And Sky's struggle to keep the truth a secret from Jeffrey is the perfect example of this more sensitive side that she does have. She cries for the only time in the series. Once Jeffrey learns the truth, he is, of course, distraught and wants nothing to do with Alec. Sky consoles him the best she can, but the next morning, Dexter shows up to bring Jeffrey back to Arundel. Sky, Jane, and Alec all band together to protect him. "It's on you then, kid. Before I go, though, I have a message from your mother." Dexter looked around as if he expected the others to go away. They didn't. She apologizes and says that she did the best she could. "Thank you. And you can tell her—" Jeffrey stopped, not knowing how to finish the sentence. To Jane's delight, it was Alec who came to his rescue. "Tell Brenda that Jeffrey's doing the best he can, too." Jeffrey refuses to talk to Alec and is understandably miserable for the rest of the trip. The Penderwicks try their hardest to keep him safe and somewhat happy, and as their trip comes to a close, they put together a little concert for Batty to show off her brand new musical ability. And again, Jeffrey stopped playing. His hands hung limp, and he tried to whisper to Batty, but instead he sank forward until his head fell onto the keys with a discordant crash. With that crash, and the horrible, wrenching sobs that followed, Sky and Jane were on their feet. Jane to scoop up a bewildered Batty, and Sky to catch the saxophone that Alec threw aside in his haste to get to his son. In 2 strides he reached him, pulling Jeffrey up and hugging him, hugging so fiercely that he would never let go. It took a long time, but at last Jeffrey's sobs slowed down, and the two started to talk. "I haven't forgiven you. Don't you dare think that it's suddenly all better." This was Jeffrey, showing no signs of wanting the hugging to stop. "No, I won't, I promise." Sky lingered on the beach, waiting for Jeffrey. He was still inside with Alec. They'd been talking for almost an hour now, but Sky didn't mind. "Tell me," she said. "Mostly we talked about music." "Jeffrey!" "And his family." "My family?" He shook his head with happy disbelief. "My cousins are musicians too. There's one my age, a girl who plays the cello." Sky's head snapped around. "She doesn't play soccer, does she?" "I don't know. Why?" "No reason." She hadn't gotten so far as wondering about cousins and how much Jeffrey might end up liking them. The book ends with everyone returning to Gardam Street and Rosalind meeting Alec. I kinda wish she had been here the whole time. That's Point Mouette, probably the most intense book so far. Things are building very nicely. I gotta say, this conflict really tests your suspension of disbelief. This entire book hinges on an insane coincidence. The Penderwicks just happened to be staying next door to Alec, and Jeffrey just happened to be there. I actually really like this though. It makes me feel like anything can happen in this world. It's this sweet, cozy storybook universe where a boy can stumble upon the father he never knew while on vacation with a different family who loves him like a brother. This installment develops these characters and their relationships in a really interesting way. Sky and Jane probably have my favorite dynamic of all 4 sisters. They play off each other so well, and it feels so much like a real relationship between sisters. Seeing Sky genuinely worry about Batty and later Jeffrey is really nice too. I'm not a huge fan of the Jane and Dominic business, but I still love the way Sky and Jeffrey's relationship is written in this book. They were one of the first pairings I ever shipped as a kid. I was obsessed. I loved Sky Effrey, but now that I have seen the way the series ended, I feel a little differently. Point Mouette was my favorite installment when I was younger, and I almost think of it as the last real Penderwicks book. 10 out of 10. The Penderwicks in Spring is so different from any other book in the series in terms of tone, and with it we get some major shifts in the status quo. We're back on Gardam Street this time, so no trips or adventures. The Penderwicks in Spring takes place 5 years after Point Mouette, so 6 years after book 1. Rosalind is 18 and a freshman in college, Sky is 17 and about to graduate high school, Jane is 16, Batty is 10, and Ben is 7. The family has a new member, a 2-year-old daughter named Lydia. She's obsessed with princesses, idolizes her big brother Ben, and is always popping up to pester her older siblings. So much has changed. The first piece of information we learn, besides the fact that Lydia's here now, is that Hound, our beloved family pet, is dead. Her father had promised that the hurt, the terrible loneliness would fade someday, but Hound had been dead for 6 months, and Batty was still struggling to understand a world without him. Her earliest memories were of Hound. And then last autumn, his heart had stopped working properly. The veterinarian said that they just had to care for him and love him, and Batty had loved him and loved him and loved him, but it hadn't been enough. No one in her family had ever said that Hound's dying was her fault, but she knew the truth. She hadn't been able to keep him with her, to stop him from leaving her behind. This book is almost entirely from Batty's perspective, with a couple of chapters from Ben. Rosalind, Skye, and Jane are barely in this book. One of my major complaints with this series that's gonna come back later is that it seems to me like Birdsall wants to have it both ways. She wants to do what Little Women did and follow her characters into adulthood, but it doesn't seem to me like she likes writing teenagers. That's totally fine, especially for a middle grade series, but after this time skip, she's just not as interested in checking up on the main characters of the first 3 books. It feels as though the older sisters have been reduced to one personality trait. Skye gets a little more attention, but I feel like Jane and Rosalind are characterized exclusively by their relationships. Jane has a cohort of boys over at the house all the time, and that's the only time she's ever really mentioned. She's still a writer and is learning French in high school, but every time we see her, she's in the living room with a bunch of dudes. Batty couldn't help thinking they didn't spread themselves around very well. Surely there were teenage girls right this minute without any boys at all in their houses. Although she has taken up sewing, which is a very Jane hobby. I like that. Rosalind and Tommy continued to date all the way up until senior year of high school, then broke up before going off to college. Nick is actually in the army, fighting in the war overseas. It's not stated specifically, but the war in question has to be the War on Terror. I know I said these books were made to feel intentionally timeless, but starting with this installment, Birdsall writes in a ton of references to pop culture and modern events. There's Star Wars, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Doctor Who, The Beatles, Beyonce, Dolly Parton, Queen! Wait, so if Queen exists in the Penderwicks universe, does that mean that the movie... No. That's just from skimming the first third of the book. Don't get me wrong, the last 3 books had computers and Bruce Springsteen, but I was okay with those because they were very sparse and they're old enough. This is just excessive and makes the book feel very dated. Batty is the most fleshed out character in this installment, but her love of music has become her defining characteristic. It has literally become her life. Even Ben, who we haven't seen since he was a toddler, really only has like 2 personality traits. He really likes rocks, and he loves his best friend Raphael. Honestly, I love Raphael too, he's such a character. All we know about him is that he also likes rocks, and he's not allowed to take baths by himself because one time he flooded his house. It's a little bit funny because now that Batty and Ben don't have their other siblings to play off of, they've both been given a best friend to talk to. Batty has Keiko, who likes baking. See, like everybody's given one quirky thing. Anyways, things are going well for Batty. She's discovered that in addition to her other musical talents, she has a wonderful singing voice. But things go downhill for her quickly, and they stay that way for the rest of the book. Unfortunately for everyone, Jeffrey has decided that he is head over heels, hopelessly in love with Skye. So Skye has banned him from the Penderwick house. "He wrote music for me once," said Jane. "When I was 10, remember? I thought it the most interesting thing that had ever happened to me. So why didn't he fall for you? You would have appreciated him. Skye, he's always been nuts for you, ever since the first time you 2 met. I crashed into him and almost knocked him out. Well, now you know not to do that anymore." As I'm sure you know, this is a major plot point in Little Women. Laurie falls in love with Joe, and she rejects him because she values her freedom and independence too much to get married. Skye, a modern interpretation of Joe, just doesn't want to date anybody. "I just don't want a boyfriend right now. I want to get out of high school and go to college and learn, and soak up the universe." I'll just say it now, I don't like Skye in this book, and she was my favorite character for years, not just in this series, like ever. She makes Ben tell the family Jeffrey won't be visiting because she doesn't want to deal with it and she knows Batty will be upset. Sky has never been the kind of girl to make her little brother fight her battles for her. And Batty is upset. She still looks up to Jeffrey and loves talking about music with him. Also, she starts a dog walking business to make money. That's why there are dogs on the cover. Okay, good news and bad news. The good news is Nick has come home from war. The bad news is Rosalind has a new boyfriend and he sucks. His name's Oliver and he's really into film. He's the kind of guy whose favorite movie is like a Bulgarian silent film from 1942 that's 4 hours long and like 5 people have seen, and he thinks you're dumb because you've never heard of it. Everyone hates Oliver, except Rosalind, of course. Lydia even stabs him with a quesadilla, which is the closest I've ever gotten to liking her. So Sky's birthday is coming up and celebrations are underway. Penderwick birthday cakes were always deliciously homemade and from scratch. Cake from a mix, or even worse, store-bought birthday cake, would have been a sign that the world was coming to an end. Each sibling had her or his own special cake, ritually chosen at the age of 5, which the first Mrs. Penderwick had declared the age of reason, at least when it came to cakes. I was so inspired by this passage that when I was younger, I started making birthday cakes for everyone in my family, but that was short-lived because everyone liked the store-bought ones better. Can't imagine why.
Try again.
Also, Batty got Sky a Doctor Who sweatshirt as a birthday present, so in case you were wondering what was on her shirt, it's the very top of David Tennant's head. Jeffrey is here for Sky's birthday, and things are actually going pretty well until later that night after everyone's gone to bed, except for Batty, who's listening in at the top of the stairs. There's a lot of eavesdropping and overhearing in these books. We're about 2/3 of the way through, and this is where the plot really gets started. This next part is pretty long, but I'm going to read most of it because it's really important. I also just think it's good. It's just that it's hard for me to be with you and not want... He paused. You're so beautiful, you know. No, Jeffrey, no. And there's no one else? You're certain? You just promised. I know, but I hate this. It's like my best friend has been taken over by an alien. Sky's voice caught. You have to go back to Boston now. I don't want you here anymore. Not forever, said Sky, just until you calm down. What if I don't ever calm down? I really can be your best friend and love you too, you know? No, I don't know. Obviously you can't. Do you ever think about falling in love? I mean, not with me necessarily, but with anyone. Sky groaned. No, I don't. Not yet, not now. Ever? Jeffrey, my best friend wouldn't be torturing me like this. How many different ways do I have to explain to you that I don't want to talk about this? I just want to understand. You want to understand? You really want that? Then listen to me. This is what happens when people fall in love. They get married, right? And they're really happy and have great jobs, and then they have babies and they're still happy and love the children, and then with no warning, out of absolutely nowhere, the mother's suddenly going to have another baby, even though she already has 3 perfectly good daughters. And that would be bearable, except that it turns out she also has cancer. Sky, you don't need to say all this, said Jeffrey. I'm so sorry. I'll just go now. But if you want to understand, I do need to say all this. The mother has cancer, and she's pregnant, and because treating the cancer could hurt the baby, she has to make a decision. And she never asks her daughters what they think, or even her husband for all I know, and she decides to protect the baby and let the cancer kill her. So she dies. She died, and in exchange... Don't say it, Sky, Batty heard Jeffrey say. Please, I know you don't mean it. Why wouldn't I mean it? It's true. In exchange for our dead mother, we got another sister, just what we didn't need. We got Batty. No wonder her family never talked about her guilty Roland Hound's death, not with this so horribly more calamitous, more tragic death in her past. But she wouldn't tell anyone that she knew. No one. Not her family, not even Keiko. Her father and sisters had chosen to keep their secret, and she would keep it too, locking it into a box and burying it deep. It was the least she could do for Sky, for everyone, for replacing the lovely woman they'd adored and lost. Batty spends the rest of the book in a deep depression. She can't eat, she can't sleep, she can't sing. She starts skipping school because she feels sick all the time and she can't stop crying. She no longer wants to celebrate her birthday because she thinks of herself as a burden on her family. I've criticized parts of this book, but the way Birdsall writes Batty's grief is incredible. It is so heartbreaking. When Batty refused to go to school again the next day, Iantha took her to the family doctor, who couldn't find anything wrong but drew some blood to make sure. No one likes having blood drawn, but Batty didn't mind it all that much. The now familiar fog protected her from the rest of the world, muffling lights, colors, sounds, and sensations. Batty had stopped fighting the fog, wrapping herself in it like a quilt, taking it with her to her room when she got back from seeing the doctor. She'd spent the whole day drifting in and out of sleep that gave her no rest, full of endless dreams of searching, sometimes for Hound, but sometimes Hound was with her, and they were searching together, weeping for someone else. When Rosalind got home that night, she ran upstairs to Lydia's room to see Batty, but Batty was either asleep again or pretending to be. She barely knew the difference herself anymore, and Rosalind went away disappointed. The family is worried sick about her, especially poor little Ben. Jeffrey sends her a gift as an apology for leaving so abruptly. Do you remember giving this to me on my 11th birthday? A long time ago. You were only 4. Because it was your favorite photo, you said that maybe I'd let you borrow it back someday. This seems like the right day to me. Yours, Jeffrey. It was a framed photograph, the one she'd been looking for everywhere, the one, it came back to her now, that she'd kept beside her bed when she was small, until she'd given it away to Jeffrey. Hound. At one point, she even tries to run away to Boston to see Jeffrey and almost gets away with it before Nick catches her. Stop crying and tell me what's going on. Nothing's going on, she gasped through her tears. I can't tell you. Who can you tell? No one. Besides, they all know. Only I didn't know. She wept and wept. You're not making any sense. There's no sense to make. Everything's fine. Which is why you're crying, I guess. Nick is the real MVP of this book. He's so awesome. Rosalind comes home from college to see Batty and figure out what's going on, and Batty's secret comes out. This passage is another long one, but I'm going to read it anyway because it stuck with me more than anything else in these books. The secret was almost ready to burst free now, bringing with it all of Batty's desolation, her guilt, her fear. It was tearing her apart. She wasn't sure she'd still be there at the end, but there was no stopping this explosion, not even when she realized how much she was frightening Rosalind. Even when she heard Rosalind telling her not to move. Please don't move. Promise you won't move, Batty, because she would be gone for just a minute, and then Rosalind was gone. Batty was smothering, drowning in anguish, and then her father came for her, shoving aside anything that got in his way, and somehow carried her out and laid her gently on the bed. Iantha was there too, covering Batty with blankets and asking calm questions, trying to understand, but Batty could only babble about killing her mother and how they should ask Sky about it, because only Sky told the truth. To Jeffrey, anyway, Sky had told the truth to Jeffrey, and that she understood if they didn't love her, because who could possibly love a girl who brought death with her, and that she knew she'd been a terrible bargain, a pitiful exchange for her mother. With that, the secret was released from its box, dissipated, confessed, its power stripped away, and somehow Batty, still alive and in one piece, hadn't been abandoned. Because here was her father, holding her and telling her how much he loved her, how much they all loved her. And now, at last, she could slip away into a sleep free of nightmares, into the healing rest she so badly needed. The rest of this book is dedicated to dealing with the emotional fallout of this misunderstanding. Mr. Penn explains that her mother didn't sacrifice herself for Batty. At the time, they had believed her cancer would still be treatable after Batty was born. Sky, who was only 7 when she lost her mother, simply misunderstood the situation and has been harboring this resentment and anger for years, which affected her relationship with Batty. You were a gift, a part of your mother left behind. You must understand that there are never guarantees with a disease like cancer. Lizzie could have undergone every treatment available and still died, and then we wouldn't have had you either. It's pretty much smooth sailing from here on out. Nick, sadly, has to leave Gardam Street once again, but before he goes, he makes Batty promise that before he comes back, she has to get another dog. And stop running away. Rosalind breaks up with Oliver and gets back with Tommy, which everyone is thrilled by. But most importantly, Batty is back to normal, and she and Sky are able to reconcile. Batty, I know that's hard on you, not seeing him. It must be, or you wouldn't have tried so hard. What do you talk about when you're with him anyway? Just music? Batty tried to think. She could talk to Jeffrey about everything and anything, but their conversations always came back to music. Mostly. When he talks about music to me, my brain turns to mush. Too bad you're not my age. He could have his dopey crush on you and leave me alone. Well, I'm not your age. I'm also sorry I've never been a very good sister to you. Or even nice to you, I guess. Don't apologize about that, please. Why not? Good grief, don't cry. You weren't nice to me because you didn't like me. You were honest. Honest. Yes, I'm always that, even when I shouldn't be. Like Gardam Street, In Spring ends with an epilogue about the Penderwicks welcoming Nick home once again, and we also get an update on how everyone else is doing. Rosalind, from her college in Rhode Island, where she was studying fiercely and without distraction, her heart safely stowed in Delaware with Tommy, faithful and true. And Skye, from her college in California, also studying fiercely but with a heart still very much her own. She and Jeffrey, who is now in college in Boston, continued to be friends, despite many battles since the previous spring, especially the big one at his high school graduation party, which no one ever spoke of, the memory of it being too awful for those who loved them both. Batty did indeed get 2 dogs named Feldspar and Sonata, which I think is dumb, I'm sorry, it's too on the nose. It's been 10 years since I first read this book, and I still haven't decided how I feel about it. The tone is so completely different from the first 3, the time skip doesn't help, and the older sisters feel like shadows of their former selves. Rosalind only exists in the context of whatever boy she's dating or not dating, until she swoops in to comfort Batty at the end. Jane is too wrapped up in her friends and her French to do anything important, and Skye is just so cold, which she never was before. Sure, she was always the least emotional sister, and she has held a grudge against Batty since book 1, but I just never got any catharsis from her apology to Batty, because she can be sensitive when she needs to be. She wept after finding out Alec was Jeffrey's father. Think of how dedicated she was to taking care of Batty at Point Mouette. She does care, but I almost don't recognize this version of her. That being said, this book had such a huge emotional impact on me when I first read it, and even for a kid's book, I think it's really well written. The Penderwicks in Spring is a good book, just not a good Penderwicks book. It's the black sheep of the family. Like, even when I read the last 2 books in the series, I imagined the Gardam Street house differently. For the first 3, I always pictured my childhood home, but for the last 2, I can only see my grandmother's house. I have no idea what that means, like, psychologically. In Spring is just so weird because Birdsall seems insistent on keeping the series kid-oriented, so the teenage sisters become an afterthought, but she delves into such dark territory here. From here on out, the series seems to shift. The last 2 books are so much lower energy and they just don't have that spark. We're not even running on the cover anymore. Batty's wagon was actually a gift from Aunt Claire in the second book, so that is very cute. I really have no idea how to rate this one, but I'll go with a 7 out of 10. We now arrive at the final installment in the series, The Penderwicks at Last. I still remember the day I got it. I made my mother take me to Barnes & Noble the day it came out. I ran to the kids section. I was pushing and shoving kids out of the way. Not really. There was actually nobody else buying this book. But I would have started pushing and shoving if I had to. I brought it home, went straight up to my room, read the whole thing in one sitting, and when I was done, I slammed the book shut, shoved it under my bed, and yeah, perhaps I cried a little bit. I didn't love The Penderwicks in Spring, but I still had really high hopes for the series' conclusion, and I was crushed. To this day, The Penderwicks at Last is one of my least favorite books. I don't understand any of the choices that were made here. The Penderwicks at Last is set another 10 years after The Penderwicks in Spring, so 15 years after the first book. Rosalind is 27, Skye is 26, Jane is 25, Batty is 19, Ben is 16, and Lydia is 11. I hate these time skips. We miss out on so much of these characters' lives, and Birdsall refuses to have this series grow up with its audience, which is fine, it can just be for kids, but because the older sisters are all adults now, the protagonist of this book is Lydia. I don't care about Lydia, I'm sorry. The last time we saw her, she was an annoying toddler, and now she's grown up into a kid I don't know. So now we're just following a character we're not familiar with and are not invested in. We only get little tidbits about the older sisters. Rosalind works on an urban farm, even though in the first book she hated plants. Now, Rosalind had never cared about plants. She had wanted to for her father's sake, but in her secret heart, a plant was just one more thing that needed feeding and coddling. Of course, people's interests can change between the ages of 12 and 27, but we didn't see any of that change. I want to know how she got there, but Birdsall is so uninterested in writing these characters as adults. You chose to make them adults! She and Tommy are still together and are getting married this summer, which becomes the framework for this entire book. So aside from their break last book, Rosalind's been dating Tommy since she was 13. Very Janine Teagues of her. But Tommy's no Tariq, okay? He has it together. He's a stand-up guy. Sky is still studying astrophysics in California, and she's in a relationship. The way I see it, Birdsall had 3 options here. Option 1, Jeffrey. This one is pretty much a slam dunk and would please the majority of readers. People love Sky Effrey, man. They're rooting for him. They're best friends, and a potential romance was established as far back as Point Mouette. Jeffrey has feelings for Sky, and even though she rejects him, it's not necessarily out of a lack of interest in him. Growing up, she had an aversion to romance in general due to her mother's death. As we saw in the last installment, she's afraid that if she allows herself to fall in love, tragedy will strike. She also just likes being single. Until now, I guess. I would really like to know what inspired this change. Would have been nice if it was covered in the books. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that as Sky got older and her misconceptions about her mother were corrected, she started returning Jeffrey's feelings. And if they get married, Jeffrey can change his last name and officially become a Penderwick during their alt mating ritual. Also, imagine Sky as Mrs. Tifton's daughter-in-law. That would open up so many interesting conflicts in the future, especially if she and Jeffrey were the ones in charge of Arundel. Option 2, nobody. She's always been an independent girl, and she doesn't need to be in a relationship. Sky is based on Jo March, who herself was based on Louisa May Alcott. She never married and only gave Jo a husband because her publishers demanded it. Keeping Sky single could be like an homage to the source material and to Louisa May Alcott. Option 3, a woman. My vote is for Melissa Pattinaud, her former rival. Yeah, maybe it's unrealistic for someone to marry the girl they played soccer with in 6th grade and never saw again, but look at Rosalind. She's been dating her boyfriend since the 8th grade. Plus, we know Melissa thinks Sky's pretty. Imagine they end up at the same college or like on a rec soccer team together. Anyways, I think these are all good options and you really can't go wrong with any one of them. Jeannie Birdsall looked at these options and said, that's all well and good, but what if I instead chose a 4th, worse option? So remember how I said these books are based on Little Women? I mentioned that Jo got married, but I didn't say to whom. After rejecting Laurie, she marries Friedrich Breyer, a much older tutor, and because there is no Breyer in our story, Birdsall feels the need to create one. Enter Dušek. What's he like? I don't know. He's a marine biologist from the Czech Republic. He speaks exactly once in the entire book, and it's in Czech. By the way, he's basically just telling Sky he misses her. This is bonkers bananas to me. How did we get here? Sky has completely changed as a character, and we don't get to see how or why. We don't even see Dušek. Lydia does mention that she's always remembered Sky as being happy and carefree, nothing like the snarky, quick-tempered girl she used to be, and that's so nice to hear. I'm happy for her. I just wanted to see it. Getting married wasn't changing Sky, except that maybe she looked even happier than usual. Batty had once told her that Sky hadn't always been so lighthearted, but in Lydia's memories, Sky was usually smiling. Marrying Sky off to a random guy is not the choice that I would have made, but it could have worked if we knew more about this guy and his relationship with Sky. But as is, it doesn't work for me at all. Birdsall keeps following this Little Women formula even when it just doesn't work for this story. Jane is working as a waitress and is still pursuing her dream of being a writer, which I think is awesome. She's also sewing Rosalind's wedding gown and the bridesmaid dresses for each sister. Also, it's not that big of a deal, but I just feel like their dress colors are all wrong. Rosalind's color is coral, like her dress in the first book, Sky is blue, Jane is lavender, like her room, and Batty is yellow. I don't know when I decided that, but it's always been that way to me. These are from about 4 years ago? Batty is at college studying music and dating an older guy by the name of Wesley, who wants to go west because he's an artist and that's where art is. He wants to take Batty with him, but she declines and they break up. Oh, and he has a 3-legged dog named Hitch who rides in the sidecar of Wesley's motorcycle. That's too far at this point, okay? It's too quirky. Wait, Bats, wait. I want to tell you... Wesley paused. You're going to be happy. I'm already happy. I know. He mounted his motorcycle. Then what did you mean? When did you mean? Wesley shook his head and started the engine, drowning out any further questions. So now we can get into the plot, which is also weird. Rosalind and Tommy have decided not to get married in the backyard like they planned, but instead want to have the wedding at Arundel. And later in the book, Skye and Dusek decide to get married and make it a double wedding. Great! I do like the idea of going back to Arundel for the final installment, but it doesn't make sense for them to get married there. The last time they were here, Rosalind was running around with Cagney and Skye was running around with Jeffrey. Now they're coming back to get married to two different guys who have never been to Arundel and have no connection to it. The family hasn't been back there since their first visit. They were banned by Mrs. Tifton. Jeffrey is the one running the property now, so the family is invited back for the wedding. I think it would have made more sense if the four older sisters had a sort of bachelorette party at Arundel and then everyone comes home to Gardam Street for the wedding. Wouldn't it make sense for Rosalind and Tommy to get married on the street where they grew up together? Also, the book should have been about the adult sisters and Skye should have married Jeffrey. And by the way, Jeffrey and Skye aren't even really friends anymore. They play soccer together like once. I'm pleased to see the Penderwicks and Jeffrey playing soccer at Arundel again, but their friendship is just gone. And think about this from Jeffrey's perspective. He fell in love with Skye when he was 11. She rejected him multiple times because she wasn't interested in any romantic relationships. And then she goes off and marries a random dude she met in college. If I were Jeffrey, I'd be like, what the hell? For all we know, he could still have feelings for her. You may have noticed that I'm not really going through the plot like I have with the last 4 books, and that's because there really isn't one. The family goes back to Arundel and Lydia actually befriends Cagney's daughter. Cagney grew up and became a history teacher, got married and had kids, a girl named Alice and a boy named Jack, who we don't meet until the very end. I think it's neat to see Cagney, but I don't really care for Alice, and I don't want to see Lydia talk to Cagney. I want to see Rosalind talk to Cagney. There are so many missed opportunities in this book, it's so frustrating. We just don't get to see nearly enough of any of the characters from the first 3 books, like Nick, Tommy, even people like Anna. Honestly, I know it's not supposed to be, but going back to Arundel was kind of sad. The grounds look completely different, the cottage is a different color, that bull is probably dead. The book is about the wedding, but the preparation is kind of happening in the background as Lydia gallivants around Arundel with Alice. This book is chock full of animals like chickens and sheep. They all have quirky names like Big Poppy and Hot Shepsoot, and I just hate it. It's so unbelievably boring. The subject matter of the books had become increasingly dark and emotional, but this one is so bland and it's more simple even than book 1. There is no conflict. If we look at the covers of all of these books, we go from running to walking to kind of standing still. And really that says everything about the trajectory of these books. I just think it's dumb to spend 3 books on one set of characters and then age them up and put them aside for the rest of the series. This entire book, we're focused on Lydia while the original Penderwick girls are just out of frame. It's so frustrating. The adult Penderwicks revisiting Arundel is such a good premise for a final book, and that should have been the focus. I know the books are for kids, but even as a child, I would have definitely preferred a book about the original characters as adults over a book about kids my age that I don't care about. The first 3 books were written as though the sisters were reminiscing on their childhoods in the future. Now we're in the future, and they're barely there. Jeffrey actually gets to Arundel after everybody else does, and ooh, when I read you this paragraph, I promise you are not ready. I thought Rosie wasn't here. She's not. Lydia saw that he was staring at Batty. That's not Rosie. He took a step back in surprise, then forward again, as if to make sure he understood what he was seeing. At the same moment, obeying some quiet command from Jane, Batty turned to face the window and caught Jeffrey's eye. For what seemed like a long time, the two stared at each other with matching confusion. Until, slowly, Batty smiled, her smile the first warm day of spring, with the daffodils and violets bursting into bloom. She opened her arms and reached toward Jeffrey, and without another word, he went inside. Whoa! You should have seen me read that part for the first time. I had to put my head down for a second. I was freaking out like, You don't have to do everything Little Women did. Batty and Jeffrey have always had a brother-sister dynamic. Jeffrey is 7 years older than her, and starting with book 3, he was her teacher. I get that a 7-year age gap would become less and less of a big deal the older they get, but like, when they met, he was 11 and she was 4. That's weird. I don't care. That's weird. I don't even think the age gap is the problem here. I think it's the fact that Batty always looked up to Jeffrey and admired him as a big brother. In this installment, Birdsall tries to convince us that they are now equals, but I just don't buy it because I know what their relationship has been like for the past 4 books. They had never been at the same level of maturity or development. And yeah, in book 1, Batty said she wanted to marry him when she was 4. Jeffrey even refers to himself as Batty's honorary brother in this book. But no, Jeffrey has to marry Batty because Laurie married Amy. Like, it is unbelievable. Mrs. Tifton is back at Arundel, surprise, and as it turns out, Lydia is the only Penderwick capable of getting along with her. I actually really like this part because Lydia sees her as just a human lady and not some villain the way the older sisters do. It's a good way of humanizing Mrs. Tifton, and I like it when they interact. She's come back to Arundel because she's convinced that one or more of the Penderwick girls is trying to marry Jeffrey for his money. But none of us wants to marry him for any reason. You told her that, right? Jane applied the towel to her face and mumbled something unintelligible through it. What? Asked Lydia. No, I didn't tell her that. She wanted me to swear to it, which was beneath me as a woman and a Penderwick. You're sure you don't want to marry him, right? Yes, of course I'm sure, 1,000 times sure. And Skye and Dusek are really happy. Yes, they are, said Jane firmly. Then why? It's a matter of principle, Lids, okay? And then later at the very end of the book, we get this exchange. I think it was more than a matter of principle. I think you didn't want to promise because Batty might marry Jeffrey someday, and you didn't want your promise to be a lie. Even to make Mrs. Tifton stop being angry, you didn't want to lie. And you want to know whether or not that's true? Yes, please. Yes, that's true. If Batty and Jeffrey do get married, it won't happen until she's older, when they're both older, like in 7 or 8 years. And you think they will. I think they might. This could be a phantasm. I have no idea what Batty thinks or if she's even considered it. And I won't ever ask her unless she brings it up. Skye and Rosie are both more certain than I am. Skye swears they're perfect for each other. Then Batty is Jeffrey's destiny. That's what Wesley said, actually, when he called me the night before he left. On the other hand, he also said my first big success will be with a series of novels, maybe 5 of them. Look, I can talk shit about this book all day, but the implication that Jane wrote the series is amazing. I love it so much. Probably the best choice that this book made. It's also kind of implied in this book that Batty and Jeffrey will go on to open a music school at Arundel, which is also what Jo and her husband did in Little Women. It wasn't a music school, but it was a school. Another random missed opportunity in this book is that Alec and Mrs. Tifton are both back at Arundel, and yet we never see them interact. And by now I'm sure you want to hear about the wedding, right? That's why we're here, that's what this whole book is about. We want to see the characters we've grown up with get married. Well, that's too bad, because we don't get to see the wedding. We skip straight from before the wedding to after the wedding. We don't get to hear a single sentence about it. Straight up, when I first got the book, I thought my copy was missing pages. Like, why would you not even... The book ends with Lydia quite literally crashing into Jack, the same way Skye crashed into Jeffrey in book 1, which, if their relationship is any indication, this means that Lydia and Jack will become best friends until Jack falls in love with her, she rejects him, then marries another guy, and then they stop being friends. So nothing, basically. It means nothing. I can't stand this book. I really can't. I've been using pictures from my copies of the books this entire time, and let's just take a look at them. The first 3 are so worn and well-loved. In Spring is a little beat up, but not that bad, and At Last looks like I bought it yesterday. And that sums it up quite nicely, doesn't it? 3 out of 10. What gets me about this book is that there were so many cool things for the original 4 to do. We don't even really know how they interact as adults. For example, Batty is the only one of the original sisters that calls Iantha Mom. You could write a whole chapter about that. All Batty really gets to do, besides fall in love with Jeffrey and break up with Wesley, is wander around Arundel trying to remember what happened in book 1. She's like, oh, did I wear wings? I don't know, I don't remember, I was so young. Like, girl, come on. Jane is barely there unless it's to tell Lydia that Batty and Jeffrey are going to end up together. I want to hear more about her and her hobbies. In the second book, she discovered a love of theater that went unaddressed for the rest of the series because now musicals and theater are Batty's thing. Imagine Jane goes back to Arundel and is inspired to continue writing the Sabrina Starr series, and maybe that's how she gets successful, you know, they become really popular books for kids. Or maybe she's inspired to start writing about her sisters and their adventures at Arundel, which it's implied she eventually does. Why not set that up now? In my opinion, with a series like this, nothing is too cheesy and nothing is off limits. Anything is possible. And all Rosalind does is get in and out of relationships. It's her wedding and she's barely in the book. She's more of a plot device than a character. And like I said, all Jeffrey does is fall in love with Batty. His relationship with Alec, which was a huge part of the third book, isn't addressed or expanded upon in any meaningful way. I didn't even mention Ben because it's not important. He's really into filmmaking now, and he keeps making Lydia star in whatever movie he's making. It's whatever. And this book doubles down on the pop culture references and modern tech. Everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's texting, and there are tons and tons of references to modern music, mostly from Batty. She led off with Greased Lightnin' from the musical Grease. Batty kept going with every car song she could think of while Lydia danced in her seat and chimed in whenever she knew the lyrics. They were on the last song in Batty's repertoire, Tracy Chapman's Fast Car, when they spotted the stone pillars that marked the entrance to Arundel. If I'm in a car with someone and they choose to follow Greased Lightnin' with Fast Car, I'm launching myself out the window. The emotional whiplash would be too much to handle. Also, maybe their family's different, but I don't know if Greased Lightnin' is the song you want to be singing in front of a child. I won't list them all, but just off the top of my head, there's mentions of Wicked, Beyonce again, Hamilton, David Bowie, Norah Jones, who I actually love, and every now and again, I go on Goodreads and read the 1-star reviews of this book, and none of them are quite as beautifully written as the one I already read to you, but it is validating to know that I'm not alone. It may seem like I'm getting overly upset about a book for children, which is the case, but as someone who loves these books so deeply, it was kind of heartbreaking to see the series end like this. This book had so many good ideas and somehow wasted them all. Even the final mops is interrupted like 5 times. This is what I mean by best and worst book series. What I really mean is favorite and least favorite. Because I was so attached to these books at such a young age, these characters felt so real to me and I was so invested in their story, and I think that's what ultimately made this ending so disappointing for me. Now let's finally wrap this video up, and as a wise woman once said, I just want to make it very clear that I have nothing but love for Jeannie Birdsall and her work. I think she is such a talented author, and her work made my childhood what it is. For better or for worse, these books have become a part of my being, from the characters to the dialogue to the cheese and tomato sandwiches. I see these books as such a wholesome, from-scratch, beautiful version of our world where you make a friend or fall in love at 12 and that person stays in your life forever. Your neighbors are family and you have such a strong bond with your sisters with secret meetings and rituals and traditions. Your childhood is defined by adventures with them, carefree and happy. This might sound a little dramatic, but I feel like this series encompasses all of the best parts of being a human being. Connections with family and friends, the beauty of nature, the magic of childhood and summer and simplicity. I see bits and pieces of my childhood in these books, but these books became such a huge part of my childhood. I read them and I see the house I grew up in that my parents moved out of years ago. I can feel the cold metal bleachers at the soccer fields where my siblings used to play. I can smell the perfume I used to wear in middle school until Bath & Body Works discontinued it. Bring back Sweet Magnolia and Clementine. These battered, burnt books came with me when my family moved, when I went to college, on every road trip I ever went on. As a kid, I loved this series, but as an adult, I treasure it. It just means a lot to me, and I wanted to make this video as kind of a love letter to the series. even though I kind of was hating on it at the end. I don't know if I'd recommend these books to you, but if you have a daughter or niece or younger sister, I think she would like these books. Maybe just give her the first 3 and tell her it's a trilogy. And there's a bunch of stuff I didn't mention, a bunch of subplots I left out. I didn't even mention Bugman. There's a lot more to explore in these books. I wanted to end with a few of my own personal headcanons that I otherwise would not have the opportunity to share. Some of these I came up with on my own, and some of them I think I saw years ago on Tumblr and just kind of absorbed them. Number 1, the Geigers are Jewish. Number 2, if we're running on the assumption that the books take place in the modern day, Rosalind listens to Lenka, Skye mostly listens to classical music, but secretly really likes Imagine Dragons, and she doesn't want Batty and Jeffrey to find out because they'll never let her live it down. Jane listens to Regina Spektor, Batty listens to literally everything. Number 3, Skye drinks black coffee, Jane drinks frappuccinos, and Rosalind and Batty both drink tea. And number 4, Ben is gay, Jane is bisexual. I still don't really know what Skye's deal is. If you're a fan of the Penderwicks and you were also disappointed with the way the series ended, I would like to direct you to a fanfiction called The Penderwicks Forever. It is so good, even though the title kind of reminds me of Maximum Ride Forever, which was not good. The bare bones of this fanfiction is the same as the final book, but it's focused on the adult sisters. They all go to Point Mouette for Rosalind's bachelorette party, and then all go to Arundel for the wedding. So part of it is set on Gardam Street, part of it is set at Point Mouette, and it ends at Arundel, which I think is probably the best way to combine all the important settings of the books. It delves into Rosalind's hesitance to have children of her own because she feels as though she had to become a mother when she herself was still a child. Skye and Jeffrey's relationship is a big factor. Jane starts writing all of her memories about the sisters. Even Batty has stuff to do, you know? Everybody ends up in the exact right place, in my opinion. There are a couple of choices that I don't necessarily like, particularly for Jane. I think if you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But this fanfiction, I think, is really well written. It captures the style of the original series well enough, and I would highly recommend it. Honestly, it's probably one of my favorite fanfictions ever. There's even a scene where Batty sings Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and it forces Rosalind to confront her inner turmoil and unresolved trauma, and she actually leaves right before a concert and checks herself into rehab. Wait, no, I think I must be getting my wires crossed. And if you are not a Penderwicks fan, I can't believe you stuck around all the way to the end of this video, honestly. It's very long. I honestly have never been more happy or excited to make a video about anything and write all my thoughts down and do all these drawings. I've been working on this video for so long that I've been having dreams about it. I had a dream last night that I was reading through the 5th book and I found a reference to A Boy is a Gun by Tyler the Creator, and I was like, Igor wasn't even out the year this book was published. This was very much a labor of love for me, and if you are still here all the way at the end, I very much appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you liked me, be sure to subscribe to my channel. If you want, you can even turn notifications on so you'll be the first to know when I'm baking you a scrumptious pineapple upside down cake. You can also hit the join button here on YouTube or become a patron. You get access to a bunch of fun perks like early access to all my videos and exclusive content. I would very much appreciate your support. Anyways, it's going to be all from me. I've got to go save my sister from getting trampled by a bull. Bye!